CAT8
is a group of Jain individuals and professionals
who are assisting the community at large
during the COVID-19 crisis.
CAT8 began just before the COVID-19 crisis,
when it held a can challenge,
where children created iconic monuments
using cans of food. It raised some 3 tons of canned food,
enough supplies for 4 months.
For the Watford Food Bank,
run by the Trussell Trust.
During the COVID-19 crisis,
CAT8 is helping the elderly, the vulnerable,
Those in isolation and key workers.
with meals and essential shopping.
help with medicine collection
and someone to talk to.
Whilst coping with isolation.
CAT8 is organising webinars,
imparting information and creating awareness.
A range of topics for all age groups.
In addition, we have created a business and education helpline
For individuals and businesses
that need further guidance
on the topics of all the webinars.
We also have a YouTube channel,
a Facebook page and a Twitter handle
CAT8 is a newest network fibre,
connecting the community.
Slide, please. Thank you. We are very kindly supported by a number of businesses to enable us to carry out our work. Our speaker today is Sawan Shah. Sawan has a profound interest in education and helping the younger generation. He studied medicine at the University of Birmingham and has sat on interview panels at the university. His company, Sawan Shah Limited, specializes in university, medical and dental admissions, as well as university entrance exams such as BMAT, UCAT, JAMSAT, IMAT, and TSA. The company also helps applicants with personal statements and university interviews, including multiple mini interviews. It also focuses on Oxbridge applications and interviews. The company is based in Stanmore and trains many national and international students, either face-to-face or online. The company's motto is to bring out the best in each and every individual. So over to Sawan.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. That's very good. And also thank you so much for joining this webinar this afternoon on the how to prepare an effective personal statement. So just going to share the screen. Okay, so basically today's talk is going to be about how to prepare an effective personal statement, and I'm sure that by the end of the webinar you'll be in a better situation in terms of how to write a very effective personal statement, and also what constitutes a good personal statement. It might change your opinion in terms of what is actually the best type of personal statement. So often what happens is that when somebody asks about what is a good kind of personal statement, what is it exactly? A personal statement is basically exactly what it states there. It is a personal thing. So it is very individual. It is very unique. So therefore it has to be different, and it has to be original, and it has to be very creative. So in terms of what actually it is, this is relevant for a lot of people who are in year 12 currently, who will then be going on to year 13 and will be submitting a UCAS application form in due course. and then will be selecting the universities that they want to apply for in order to go to study a particular course at a particular university. So it basically forms part of the UCAS application, and actually will support it in the sense that it will tell a university why you want to do a particular course, the skills that you have that are suitable for that course, and your motivation for doing that course, as well as obviously your academic achievements to date, and more importantly, the experience, both in terms of a work experience perspective and a life experience perspective, as well as the interest that you have that will support that. So we will go through in the course of this webinar what makes up a good personal statement, what it should include, and also how you can actually make sure that you stand out from the crowd, because that is basically what is needed. Because don't forget, universities see many personal statements, and in order to stand out, there's certain things you need to do, which I'll talk to you about. The personal statement itself should actually be no more than 4,000 characters long. That is what is allowed on the UCAS form for the personal statement section, and no more than 47 lines. So in terms of who looks at the personal statement when you actually submit it to UCAS, it will actually be the university admissions tutors who obviously work for the university. They will decide whether the personal statement that you've written actually meets the criteria for the admissions, and in particular for the course that you're applying for as well, because as you probably know, a different selection criteria, and there are different things that they'll be looking out for. So then they can use that to decide whether to just straight away give you an offer. In some courses, that's certainly fine, and in other courses, you will be invited for an interview, or obviously in the worst case, being rejected. When it comes to the offer types that you actually get from universities, there are three types of offers you could actually potentially receive. The first one is something called a conditional offer. This is the most common type, where they say that you need to get a particular result in order to join that university. So they'll give you certain grades that you need to get when you actually do your A-levels. And then the other type is an unconditional offer, where what happens is they say that you will be able to join the university regardless, essentially, of the type of grades that you get. But that is actually not as common as the conditional offer. However, saying that, it is also something that they're looking to try and remove, because this almost removes the motivation to perform well. So that is becoming less common over time now. And the third one is probably the newest type of offer, which is something called a contextual offer. Now, I just want to quickly explain what this is, because a lot of people don't know much about contextual offers. A contextual offer is where the university can decide that in a given area, if there is a low rate of progression of people going to, say, higher education in the form of university, then they may actually offer you a lower grade requirement to get into a particular university or into a particular course. And that is actually very university dependent. So it could be, for example, 1 grade lower. It can be up to 2 grades lower, depending on the university. They could also look at other circumstances. For example, if you, for example, are a full-time carer or a carer, even part-time, or for example, if you have refugee status. So they do look at like personal individual circumstances as well. So if in doubt, it's probably best to contact the university departments in order to find out what they actually offer regarding the contextual offers. If you actually get invited for an interview in certain courses, they will invite you for an interview before actually giving you, for example, an offer. They will give you different types of interviews. It depends on the university and the course, what type of interview you will be given, before them obviously deciding whether to give you an offer. So the types of interviews that universities run are the panel interviews, where there's a group of academics in the university, say 2 or 3 of them, who will basically sit down in a boardroom and will interview the candidate, which is in this case the student. and they will try and ask them questions that are relevant to obviously their personal statement, and also just a wider field of questions about themselves and their interests and even their general knowledge. So that is a type of interview that is actually more like the traditional type of interview. They also sometimes do have students like in the university who sit on the panel as well, just to provide some sort of comfort to the candidate who's coming in. The second type is a multiple mini interview, or otherwise known as an MMI. This type of interview is now very common in careers or courses such as medicine, dentistry, for example, where they run stations where they assess practical skills as well as finding out more about the candidate in order to assess whether they will fit the type of caliber they're looking for when it comes down to such careers and such professions. So they are more of the newer type. And for this, again, I would suggest and strongly recommend that a candidate prepares themselves for such interviews before actually going for them. The next type is basically obviously the traditional one-to-one interview, although these are fairly rare in order to avoid bias and things like that. And then obviously you can also have group interviews because they want to check how well you can interact with other people as well. Now, what I always recommend is that basically before somebody applies to university for a particular course, it's always important to take a step back and actually to think about, why are you applying for a particular course? What is your motivation for doing that course? Could there be something that you perhaps missed, or should you be looking at another course which is, for example, more relevant to your skill set? The next question you also need to ask yourself is that, do you even need to go to a university for that course? Because these days there are lots of apprenticeships, and for certain careers such as accountancy and engineering, for example, they could be better served by actually heading down the route of an apprenticeship where you gain the professional qualifications as well as the experience at the same time. Unlike the university route where you just gain academic skills but have no guarantee of a job afterwards, and also have not gained any experience during your time in the workplace. Then you also need to consider the 5 universities that you want to apply to. That is the maximum number you can apply for. In some courses, you can only apply for 4, such as medicine, dentistry, and veterinary science. So when you're selecting these universities, again, you have to question why you're applying for them. For example, your reasons could factor into account, for example, things like not just their position in the league tables, but actually many other factors. For example, you should look at how they run their programs, whether that actually fits your learning styles, and what you can achieve by going to a particular university in the long term. Then you should also consider, are there any other entrance requirements that are necessary apart from obviously the personal statement or even the interview? What else do you need to do? So for some courses, you might need to do some exams, such as the UCAT and BMAT for medicine, for example, UCAT for dentistry, LNAT for law. So in some cases, you may also need to do a TSA exam, for example, for the Oxbridge universities, and also step papers for maths as well. So you need to consider which are the exams you have to give in addition to your A-levels. So watch out for that. Then you also have to consider what you kind of have got in terms of your GCSEs as well as your predicted A-levels, because some universities actually place greater emphasis on the GCSE results, whereas some others actually have more focus on your predicted results and some on those entrance exams I just mentioned. So you have to consider which one do they actually factor into account the most, because it's better so you don't end up making the wrong choice. In addition to that, some will also prefer IB rather than A-levels, and that's something that needs to be considered as well, because some universities will actually, if they have a choice between different candidates, they may actually make a decision purely based on basically what somebody's results are in terms of what they did in terms of either A-levels or IB. And then obviously the most important thing is if you are aware of the skills that are relevant to the course, because we'll talk about how that is relevant in the personal statement, and then how you can demonstrate evidence of the skills as well as all the other achievements that you have from an academic perspective, work experience perspective, and any other extracurricular activities you have. The evidence is really, really key, and we'll talk about that a bit more in the webinar. And then basically any other assets or skills that you can bring to the university, because don't forget the university is an institution and therefore they're looking for people who can deliver and for people who can add to their kind of strengths there. So when you're actually thinking about like, okay, let me write up a personal statement, the first place you have to start after asking those questions to yourself is that what skills do you actually need to get into a particular course and into a particular university? That actually can be found. Many people probably don't know this, but that can actually be found quite easily by accessing the prospectus for a given university, or by referring to the course fact files on UCAS, or actually just contacting the relevant department and asking for the latest skill sets document that they need for a given course. And obviously they'll be happy to provide that to you so that you can showcase that you've achieved those. Okay, so writing an effective personal statement actually has to follow a particular format, has to follow a structure, and this is kind of what we're going to be talking about now. For example, from the perspective of, if you're going to be talking about a skill set, what should you actually include? So it's easy, because all you have to think about is the ABCs, essentially, of personal statements. What that means is for every skill that you're going to be mentioning, you must address everything about the ABCs, which means essentially, what have you actually done in terms of from a skill set or an experience perspective? Then basically from that perspective, what kind of skills have you actually picked up by doing a particular experience or by accomplishing something? And then obviously from there, how are those skills relevant to a given course? So these three things need to be addressed. And if any one of them is lacking, then that would be a faulty personal statement, essentially. Then the next important thing is that you have to link every single key aspect together. So for example, the motivation, which is one of the most important things about writing a personal statement. Somebody has to be able to see how well motivated you are to do a particular course, and that should be quite apparent in your personal statement. And that should be linked obviously to your skill set, to the experiences you've had in life, as well as from a work experience perspective, and obviously the ambitions and aspirations that you have as an individual, as well as the knowledge that you've gained thus far. Everything that you write has to be further backed up by basically evidence, and you must explain yourself in the most concise and effective way possible in order to showcase that you are not just able to have all the skills and experiences, but able to put that in a very coherent form together in the form of a personal statement. And then it's very important to be creative with language. So use your own use your own words, use your own experiences to help you come up with an effective personal statement. Because one of the things I find a lot is that people just want to read other people's personal statements and they try and almost make it similar to that. But that's actually one of the worst things you could actually potentially do, because the whole point of a personal statement that I mentioned right at the beginning was that it is personal. So it has to be unique, it has to be original, and it has to be creative. So in terms of what to include, we can further elaborate on this and say that the skill set that you mentioned and any experiences you mentioned have to be very specific. They must be focused on how you've actually been able to accomplish the skills that they're looking for. They have to be selective, obviously, to a given university and to a given course. And it has to be structured, how you write your personal statement. In addition to that, you can just think of this in the form of a SMART kind of technique, because then it will actually help you to remember what you should have. You should also think about the motivation. The motivation is the most important thing, because if somebody else is reading your personal statement and they can't actually see that you're motivated, or they can't actually feel the motivation that's coming from you in terms of wanting to do a particular course, then most likely there are tutors who are going to read your personal statement from the university are not going to feel that either. So you have to be able to show your motivation and enthusiasm for doing a particular course. Then obviously you also have to be able to demonstrate what the university is looking for. So pay attention to what they are looking for from a skill set perspective, from the academic side, as well as from the ambition and aspirations that they're looking for in a university. Everything you mentioned should be relevant. Because it's a very short, concise personal statement. So you have to keep everything relevant, but at the same time, you must show your range of experiences and skill set quite effectively. Also, the universities are very interested in looking for candidates who are tenacious. So tenacious in the form that if they encounter an obstacle, that they're not going to give up, that they actually want to do that career, that course, they will pursue it till the end, essentially. So they want to look for a candidate who has demonstrated that despite the obstacles that they may have faced, they have actually gone on to do well, that they actually want to still do the course that they're interested in. And that is very important because after all, they are an institution. They want to look for somebody who wants to do that course. So you have to think about that as well as the exact trigger point when you decided that you want to do a particular course. Okay, so this next part of the presentation is actually the most important in terms of writing up an effective personal statement, because we will talk about the structure of an effective personal statement, and everything boils down to the structure. So the first thing you have to think about is how are you going to start off your personal statement from the introduction perspective, the first paragraph. All of these will be divided into paragraphs, by the way. So you'll have 5 paragraphs. So the first one is introduction and motivation. The second one is going to be based around your academic potential and achievements. And I'll talk more about that in a short while. Then the work experience side of things as well. So what kind of experiences have you gained in terms of doing some sort of, from an occupation perspective, but more from a work experience perspective as well, and any other volunteering that you may have done. And then any other extracurricular activities that you have participated in and what you gained from that. And obviously any other awards and achievements that actually stand out that are non-academic. And then how are you going to conclude the personal statement and how are you going to finish it off in a way that will leave the university really impressed by what you have actually written. So I think that personally, the first and the last paragraphs there are the key selling points, because if you can sell yourself in the first and last paragraphs, you are pretty much most likely to be in, and the remaining paragraphs are there to just basically prove that you have actually accomplished what they're looking for. So that has to be done effectively. Okay, so let's move on to the introduction kind of paragraph. What should you include? Because a lot of people, as I'm sure you know, when you read personal statements, they will just come out with the standard stuff about a sentence along the lines of, since the age of 5, I always wanted to do a particular career. That has been seen so often that people will not even bother paying attention to that. That type of example you see a lot, but there's many others. So what you need to do is you need to create a kind of opening where the university will be absolutely stunned by what you're actually writing in a positive way, obviously. So what I mean by that is, for example, if you're applying for a medical course, for example, and you start off a personal statement along the lines of so for example, what you find important about medicine is that it's more of an art than actually a science, due to the level of compassion that is shown, then that is very, very impressive and people want to read further. Or if you're doing, say, something like economics, and you start off with the fact that actually the potential cuts in VAT may be a bad idea for the economy, everyone will want to read more because they want to hear more about what you want to say. So it's good to start off with a very attention-seeking kind of opener, and that is very, very important. So you have to address why you want to study the course, what motivates you about that area, the course that you want to study. That has to be included in the opening paragraph as well. when and how did you arrive at the conclusion that you wanted to do that type of course and that it is the right one for you? So when did that come to kind of your mind? And what type of university would you be interested in? What I mean by that is, are you interested in a type of university, for example, that is campus-based, for example, or one that is, for example, more basically traditional, for example? Which type of career are you interested in after university? Because once you've done the course, what would you want to do after that? Because the universities would be interested in that, because obviously they want to uphold the reputation. Then you also have to consider about, was any point in time, for example, where you've actually read something really fascinating, really interesting, and that actually triggered your interest in a particular career? Then if that's the case, you need to think about that and possibly just reference that in your introduction paragraph. Same with any people who may have inspired you or motivated you to do a particular career. As I said, a powerful attention-seeking opening is the most important thing in terms of whether somebody is going to pick up a personal statement and then put it aside or discard it for that matter, or actually pick it up and want to read further actually. And if they do that, then obviously you've already stood out so far. Then the next thing is obviously second paragraph in your personal statement would be talking about your academic potential and achievements and academic interests. So this is not a paragraph where you have to just recite, for example, what you've actually got so far for your year 12 examinations, because that will be elsewhere on the UCAS form. This is not a case of repetition. This is a case of actually, when you chose your A-level subjects, how has that actually helped you in terms of gaining certain skills for this particular course? What have you enjoyed about the A-level subjects that you have actually chosen? What kind of areas did you particularly find interesting, and obviously why? What academic skills have you gained from those current studies that will actually help you to prepare for the course at university? These are things that you have to address in that second paragraph. And then for some people, they might have taken part in extra research in school or outside of school, and that could actually be very, very important, because it could already make you stand out in terms of doing something different. And that's what universities like to see. Somebody special, somebody different, and somebody extraordinary. That's who they're actually looking for. And then obviously, again, link that up with the skills that you have actually learned from all of that. Now, the work experience paragraph in the third paragraph, that is, or from an employment volunteering perspective, any experiences that you've gained throughout your kind of short career so far, you would actually you'd have to address how that has been important and actually how that has defined your choice in terms of wanting to do a particular career. Now, this is the paragraph where you really have to discuss what kind of life skills have you gained from doing such work experience, and how is that actually tied in with the course that you actually want to do. What stood out for you when you were actually observing a particular, for example, if it was medicine, for example, operation, or if you're doing engineering, when you saw a building, what actually stood out for you, for example, or anything for anything else like that. For example, you have to talk about your observations and how that has actually inspired you and influenced your decision. Again, you have to talk about how basically you gain the skills or develop the skills that are necessary in order to pursue a particular course. Importantly, you also have to reflect on the role that you've actually undertaken and what did you actually learn and gain from that. And even if it's something that you think that it could be improved on, it's actually worth basically keeping that, because that might come up in interview. So that's actually something that's worth thinking about. And work experience is not so relevant for, say, every single course that you're going to apply for, but it's certainly important for certain disciplines, especially the vocational aspects. So again, for things like medicine, dentistry, and veterinary science, they always ask for work experience. And this could be the defining kind of paragraph for you. Then obviously every university wants to see that the candidate that they're choosing is going to contribute more than just academically to the university. They're actually going to stand out. They're going to contribute in ways that will represent the university very well. So here, this is your chance to talk about what else have you done from a non-academic perspective in your fourth paragraph. And this will actually, again, be relevant in terms of how have you built skills that are essential for a particular program, like leadership, teamwork, communication, things like that. So examples of things that people have done could include things like Duke of Edinburgh, things like a grade 8 musical instrument, a first aid program, and many others. Any charity or volunteer work would also stand out well. But again, whatever you discuss, the main thing is that how has that actually improved your skill set in terms of helping you to do the course that you want to, and how is all of that relevant? That's what you need to address. It's also very important you talk about any positions of responsibility you've had, because every single course obviously wants leaders. They want people who actually can show leadership and that they can actually show organization. So if you've been, for example, leader of a society or a committee, a captain or prefect, it's worth mentioning that. Again, tying it up with what I just discussed, the skill set. And then any other relevant interests or hobbies that will actually help you to develop particular skills relevant for a course. So people might have done, for example, life coaching, for example, or in terms of life-saving coaching from a swimming perspective, that could be relevant to helping save lives, for example, and taking on positions of, again, responsibility. And any other transferable skills that you've actually gained. For example, public speaking is very important because it can help develop self-confidence. Problem-solving skills, very relevant to all courses, and any other skills that are relevant, like teamwork and analytical skills for research, for example. So this is your moment to stand out really in the extracurricular front. Then in terms of basically from the last paragraph, the fifth paragraph, the one again where you could literally make all the difference, this is the one where you really have to impress the admission tutors in terms of why should they offer you a place. So if you imagine, say that to choose for one place, 2 different candidates, why should they choose you? What else can you offer them that is going to be different from every other candidate? So here you have to talk about your skills, qualities, and attributes that you will bring to the university, obviously, but also to the course and how you'll actually make a difference. You also have to talk about the after. So what happens after you graduate from a particular course? What are your plans after that? What ambitions and aspirations do you have? Because again, the university would want to know how you will actually be a good role model. Then also they will be interested in knowing about like what makes you different to the average candidate. So for example, if somebody was to mention about how they would like to participate in university research, for example, for universities that undertake a lot of research, that would be quite impressive because the universities will feel that this person is not just there for the short term, but they're there for the long term. Lecturing at universities could be another kind of suitable way of saying that you want to give something back, and that will really stand out from the average candidate because they want to check that you're going to be an asset in the long term for them, that is, yeah. They are, after all, an organization that is investing in you. And obviously, as I mentioned, the whole point of the last paragraph is to actually make sure you make a outstanding impression that once somebody has read your personal statement, they will remember that personal statement for a very long time. And that's why you have to finish it off on a very positive note. And also, just to mention that you often find personal statements that can appear quite arrogant, and that is not how it should be, because you should be assertive and confident, but if it sounds arrogant, then most likely that will not work, and you will not be chosen because the personality will not be reflective of what the university wants to see. Okay, now this is a very important point because a lot of people ask, what is a gap year? What is the point of a gap year? Is it just a waste of time? Actually, a gap year can be one of the most influential things that could actually help you reinforce whether you want to do a certain course. And even from a university perspective, they really love people who do gap years if they've obviously used their time effectively. So it is becoming more popular for many degrees where it's so competitive. And many universities regard this very highly because they see yourself as a more mature student who has really thought about why you want to do something. And this is the kind of section where you can already stand out. If you've done a gap year compared to somebody who hasn't, then you have more of an opportunity of showing how different you are. And therefore, that gives you another bonus point in terms of trying to get into the top universities. You can also include this in the experience or extracurricular section, one of those sections should be used to include a gap year if you've actually done one. But when you do address this, you have to talk about why did you actually choose a gap year? What did you exactly do during the gap year? Because a lot of people do things like, for example, traveling, but not just, you can't just say that you're traveling. You have to talk about what you gained from the traveling experience. What did you learn? What new skills did you develop? Some people also do things like teaching whilst they go abroad, for example, or spend time in hospitals, on placements, or with charity organizations, for example. So there's a lot you could do during your gap year. And if you do a wide variety of things, then that's better actually, because then you develop a wider skill set, which obviously will come through in your personal statement. And then again, just like anything else, you do need to link this back to what you've actually gained and how it actually ties up with what skills a university and the course is looking for. So that's why the gap year is so important. So what I want to just say is some of the top tips I can give in terms of how you can actually stand out in terms of a personal statement perspective is you do need to have a very powerful introduction and a splendid conclusion, because the person will then remember that this candidate actually stood out from all the rest. You have to be honest, because there's nothing more annoying than actually seeing someone who is trying to blatantly lie, who actually get their way through, and that can be seen as something that the universities will not actually entertain in any shape and format. So just be honest, because you have to be able to prove everything you've done. Be creative and original. Don't just copy everyone else. So don't just read a personal statement and think, I want to make this as similar to that personal statement just because it was good. You have to be original. They love original people who have new ideas. Obviously, you have to be prepared to do multiple drafts, because some people do as many as 15 to 20 drafts before creating their final version. So you do have to be prepared, because initially it might be too long, or it might not be as good as you want it to be, and you have to be prepared to do these changes. You also have to be able to read around the subject. So pick up a book, pick up something about the course or career that you're actually looking for, where you can actually talk about that if you're invited to interview, or actually use that to further show your motivation as to why you want to do a particular career. It only needs to be one book. You don't have to reference many things. Obviously, do your research both about the course and the university, because it's quite apparent how many people just decide on a career but actually do not know what they're heading for, and do not know much about the university or how the course is run. So do your research, because there's plenty of information out there. Proofreading is very important. The reason why is because obviously you need to check for any grammatical, spelling issues, which is very important. Again, you can't have these in a personal statement as it's an official document. But also, you can give the personal statement to several different people to read, because if you do that, they will give you different ideas and tips, or they will actually have all different ideas. So that way you can actually create a perfect personal statement by listening to different people. Make sure you choose the right people, though, obviously, when you're actually deciding who you want to read your personal statement. And obviously, everyone will have to type it out in a word processor first before actually condensing it and making the relevant changes, and then obviously copying and pasting it onto the UCAS section, where you'll have to make it to those relevant characters and lines. It is very important to remember that you're not applying for a job, you're not applying for a career, you're actually applying for a course at a university, and the university just wants to check that you're the right person in terms of doing that course, and also by going to that university, that you are the right type of person that they're actually interested in. And just remember that they want you as much as you basically want them. So it is also in their interest that to select the right person. And obviously from your perspective, you want to have a university where you're going to be enjoying yourself, where you're going to be happy to be at that university. And basically, so it should be a nice fit, in other words. Okay, so the other recommendations I can give is that if you're actually applying for joint degrees, then it is important that you actually give equal balance between them, because you can only write one personal statement. So it is very important that you focus on the common aspects that show their similarities. If you're applying for a master's program, then it's also important that you explain why you want to do that, rather than just a basic program for the degree. Start drafting it up early. If anything, you should already start drafting it up from now. 5 paragraphs are best, like the one I mentioned. That's how you should structure your personal statement to make it effective. And don't forget to separate each paragraph with a line. That is also very important. Some universities, such as Cambridge, Oxford, and Imperial, have more of a greater focus on research, for example. So you need to consider giving that more weight if those are the universities you're applying for. And don't forget to visit universities. Obviously, right now is not the right time because of the COVID-19 situation, but there will still be, for example, virtual open days. So you should visit universities in that way. And when they eventually do open for physical viewings, you should go and see them before actually doing your final kind of submission, because you'll be there for the long term. So it's worth just seeing it. And whatever you see is very different to what you see on paper. Speak to students as well who are at their university currently, any recent graduates, and obviously look at recent student satisfaction surveys, because they will be really important in terms of giving you honest feedback about the university and about the course. So some of the things obviously not to do are actually just list skills, for example. Don't ever plagiarize, because obviously it will be run through a software program that will check for any similarities or anything that you've ended up taking from somewhere else that is not your own. So never actually plagiarize. Don't use quotes and cliches, because again, it's not showing originality, and that will not be good. And actually never start off paragraphs by writing firstly, secondly, and thirdly, because this is not an essay. Essentially, you're not trying to write an essay or trying to prove a point. It's a case of writing a personal statement. So don't do that. Don't repeat any information you've already given, such as the predicted grades. That will go elsewhere on the UCAS form, not on your personal statement. Don't try and be humorous or sound pretentious or even be arrogant, because that will not go down well. And again, it's not a life summary, so don't give a life summary. And try not to start off every sentence with word I. Now, in terms of, some of you might be interested in actually applying for Oxford and Cambridge. There are certain differences when you're applying for Oxford and Cambridge compared to other universities. For example, you can only apply to one of these in a given year. You can't apply to both. Some subjects will be obviously taught differently in the different colleges and universities in Oxford and Cambridge. So you must make sure that you research this carefully before deciding what you want to do, where you want to apply, that is. You should also give much more emphasis on the academic side, both in terms of research and any other credentials you have from an academic perspective, to show your passion behind the topic area that you're interested in. Okay, so that plus the extracurricular activities, but more on the academic research and side of things. There may also be an aptitude test that you have to give separately to your A-levels, such as the TSA, for example. So again, research that and obviously sit those exams. Try and speak to individual kind of subject teachers at the universities that you're interested in, and possibly even at the specific colleges, so that you can get wider insight into what they're actually looking for, which will be up to date, so you can focus on that. And then actually also, don't forget that interviews will vary between the colleges, even in the same university in Oxford and Cambridge. So you will most likely be asked obviously about your personal statement, but in addition to that, some questions will also be on the subject that you're applying for. So be very knowledgeable and happy to answer those type of questions in some great detail. Okay, so preparation is everything in terms of these type of interviews, and also in terms of writing up your personal statement, because a good personal statement is one that you can almost predict what they're going to ask you if you are invited to interview. And just as a quick example, there was an interview where in Cambridge where they did ask somebody to throw a brick outside the window, and that was not supposed to be some sort of obviously test, but basically what they wanted to do was actually to check whether the candidate is going to look outside the window, check for safety, basically do all the logical things essentially. And that could be quite difficult, because a lot of people would just take the brick and throw it outside the window. Okay, then for the people who are interested in medicine, dentistry, and veterinary science, there are certain differences that you have to be aware of. First, you only have 4 choices. So you can use the 5th choice for anything else that is not that. That is medicine, dentistry, or veterinary. You can use it for something completely different. You should also be aware that in your personal statement, you do have to know about the key phrases, the key terms that are actually used in personal statements, such as, for example, the multidisciplinary team, which is known as the MDT, the biopsychosocial care model, which is a big thing these days. Again, if you don't know about that, it is worth reading about that. Dexterity, like how good you are with your hands. If you want to become a surgeon or a dentist, you have to be able to prove how good you are with your hand skills. The good medical practice, the good dental practice, tomorrow's doctors, Hippocratic Oath. There's so many things you have to be aware of. And again, you can stand out by actually having done your reading around these things. So that is very important from that perspective. You again have to demonstrate a well-rounded character, because in such programs, they're looking for not just somebody who's academic, but somebody who actually can demonstrate humanity and is just generally a well-rounded character. And then obviously, these programs are basically vocational careers. So you will have to have a different kind of mindset when applying for this, in the sense that you have to show your true passion, almost like this is your hobby, and you want to change your hobby into a full-time job. So that is kind of what the vocation is all about. And then obviously be very clear why, for example, these programs are so important to you compared to other similar programs, because they will question why you don't want to do something else. So if you're doing medicine, for example, and you're talking about you love caring for people, then why don't you just become a nurse, for example? Or why don't you just become a physio? So you need to have some good kind of valid answers to these type of questions. Okay, so thank you again so much for listening to my kind of presentation in this webinar.